Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another Midweek Moment. How's your week going? I hope it's going good. Hope you're having an amazing week, and I'm really looking forward to spending some time with you tonight. I want to encourage you to share tonight's teaching, so go ahead and hit that button, get it out there so other people can jump on and see what's going on here at New Life and what we're talking about tonight. In fact, what I want to talk about is the subject of joy. It's time for some joy, don't you think? Time for some joy. You know, here we are, just started the first week in February, and I've already talked to people that said, you know, I started 2021 so positive, and all of a sudden I've been knocked off my feet. You know, things happened. Hey, it's life. But in spite of that, we can still have joy. I've been reading the book of Philippians. Paul wrote a letter to the Philippian church. Philippi, as we say it, it's really pronounced Philippi, is located or was located in Greece. In fact, Diane and I were in Greece in 2014 and saw some of the archaeological sites. It's a great trip. If you ever have an opportunity to do it, I would encourage you to take advantage of that. But Paul wrote a letter, an epistle, to the Philippian church, to the believers, the Christians at Philippi. And he wrote this from a Roman prison. That's right, Paul, St. Paul, the Apostle Paul, was locked up in a Roman prison, not because he broke some law, but he was locked up and incarcerated because he was sharing Christ. He was sharing the good news of the gospel, and so they found him to be a threat and locked him up in this prison. And while Paul is writing this letter, he's talking in the letter about joy. Can you imagine that? Guy locked up in a dark, damp Roman prison, and he's talking about joy. Now, I'm going to tell you, I've visited a lot of people over the years that were incarcerated in jail or prisons, and I can't think of one person that I ever walked in and spoke with that said, man, today's just a joyful day. I'm so glad. Everything's just rolling along, and man, life is happening. Nope, not one person. It's hard to have joy when you're locked up in a jail, a Roman prison. And yet Paul, throughout the 4 chapters of this book that he wrote, this epistle, he mentions joy, rejoicing, rejoice, gladness, a combination of those words some 19 different times. So let's talk about joy tonight, because I think all of us could use a big dose of joy in our life. Before we get too much into it, let me just clarify, and I've done this before in teaching on this subject over the years, but we need to determine what joy is not. Joy, the joy we're talking about, spiritual joy, the joy of the Lord, is not about personality. It's not about being bubbly. It's not about being vivacious. It's not about just having a happy, outgoing, carefree personality. Some people are like that, but that's not what Paul was like. I don't see Paul being that way at all. I think Paul was pretty serious. I think Paul was a choleric personality. So the joy of the Lord, the joy that Paul talks about, has nothing to do with personality. We know that this joy that he had originates with Jesus Christ. In fact, in John chapter 15, verse number 11, Jesus said, these things I've spoken to you, that your joy might be full with my joy, or that my joy will be in you and your joy will overflow. So the joy that Paul had is a direct result of a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. This joy is spiritual in nature, but it affects us emotionally and physically. We know the joy of the Lord, the joy Paul had, gives us strength, because Nehemiah tells us in Nehemiah 8:10 that the joy of the Lord is our strength. So even though Paul was locked up in a Roman prison, and even though things were looking pretty bleak for him and he was facing execution, he still had joy, and this joy was giving him strength, emotional, spiritual, and physical strength in spite of his situation. And we also know that joy can be lost. That's right, that joy can be depleted and even lost in our life, because David talked about in Psalm 51:12, restore the joy of my salvation. In other words, David had lost his joy. So we have to be careful that we understand that joy is a relationship with Jesus. It is a fruit of the Holy Spirit, that it gives us incredible strength in spite of what's going on in our life. But if we're not careful, it can be depleted, weakened, or even lost, okay? So what is it that causes us to lose joy in our life? What is it that attacks our joy, undermines our joy? Well, first of all, I think circumstances can do that. I mean, Paul had some very negative circumstances at this time. He could have allowed the circumstances of being locked up in a Roman prison, the idea that he was probably going to be executed. I mean, those are pretty negative circumstances. I don't think we've ever faced anything quite that serious, but certainly coming out of 2020, we certainly rode through some rough circumstances, and some of you have already hit some bumpy roads in 2021. So circumstances, if we allow them, can steal joy, deplete joy, or destroy joy in our life. Things in our life. Sometimes we're consumed with things. We live in such a materialistic society. You know, we think if I don't have this and I don't have that, then I'm not going to be happy. I'm not going to have joy in my life. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not against things. I like things. I like driving a car. I like driving a car with air conditioning in August in southern Florida. I like going home to a nice, comfortable house. I like things. I like having a wristwatch. I like having an iPhone. So it's not things, it's when we think the things in our life or the things we don't have in our life, if we don't have them, we're not going to be happy or joyful. And then worry. When we allow circumstances or being consumed with things in our life, then the next thing you know, we're worrying and we're filled with anxiety. And Paul talks about that later on in this epistle, about not being filled with anxiety and worry, but letting the peace of God guard your heart and mind. So we have to watch, the worry in our life. And then last of all, I think people. I think people can rob us of joy, all right? Because let's be honest, people can be annoying. They can be irritating. People get under our skin. People aggravate us. And we have to deal with people every day. So we have to be careful that we don't allow the people in our life to rob us of joy. So how did Paul deal with all of these things? How could he be in these circumstances? How could he not have the things that he had before he was incarcerated? How could he not be consumed with worry? And how did he deal with the people in his life? Well, here's one of the ways. Learn to be thankful for the special people in your life, because that's what Paul did. He was thankful for the special people in his life. In chapter 1, verse number 3, writing to this church, these Philippian believers, he said, "Every time I think of you, I give thanks to my God." Paul had two predominant groups of people in his life. One group of people didn't like him. They questioned his ministerial authority. They questioned his character. They questioned his message, his doctrine, what he was teaching. In fact, they were doing everything they could to undermine him, to try to destroy him, and to make him miserable while he's in prison. Okay? But he had another group of people in his life, like the Philippian believers. People that stood with him, people that believed in him, people that added value to his life. I mentioned a few weeks ago that if anything 2020 taught us, it should have taught us the importance of good family and friends, the importance of being surrounded by people that add value to our life. And so that's what Paul did. He was able, in his negative, dark circumstances, rather than being consumed with fear and worry and being frustrated by the people who were trying to do everything they could to undermine him and destroy him, you know what? He said, I'm going to focus on people like the Philippians. I'm going to focus on the people that are my true friends, the people that really add value to my life, the people that believe in me and support me and pray for me. What was his secret? He made a conscious choice. You have to make a conscious choice, not to focus on the circumstances, not to focus on the negative people, not to focus on the things you don't have in your life. I'm not saying you have amnesia and you forget those things. I'm just saying you choose to focus on these things. Focus on your friends. Focus on your family. Focus on the people that are in your corner, the people that have your back. Too often we are consumed with the negative people in our life instead of focusing on the positive, life-giving people that God has brought into our life. And whatever we think on is going to affect our attitude and our outlook on life. Whatever we think on is going to affect the level of joy and peace in our life. Paul refused to be consumed with stinking thinking. Stinking thinking. All right? Bible tells us, as a man thinks, so is he. So you have to stop and ask yourself, what am I thinking about every day? What's consuming my thoughts? Is it the circumstances? Is it what I don't have? Is it the negative people in my life? Paul said, I'm going to be thankful for the special people in my life. Every time I think of you, he said, I give thanks to my Lord. All right? The mind is important. In fact, in the book of Philippians, 10 times the mind is mentioned. And I think another 5 times thinking, or the word think, is mentioned. So Paul was all about what we think about and protecting and guarding our mind. All right? So we can't control our circumstances. Wish we could, but we can't always do that. We can't control the fact that we don't have certain things that we think we need in our life or we want in our life. And we certainly can't control what people think about us or say about us. But we can control what we think. So Paul was all about protecting your mind and disciplining your mind. And when it came to people, I'm not going to just focus on the negative people in my life. I'm going to be thankful for the people that God put in my life. So here's some suggestions, all right? Here's some suggestions this week. In fact, maybe even right now, just take a pencil and write these things down. Make a list of people who add value to your life. Write down the names of people who add value to your life. People that are real friends, people that walk with you through difficult circumstances, people that don't jump ship on you, people that don't turn their back on you. Write down what they do for you. What is the qualities that they bring to your life? They're good listeners. They're real encouragers. They're always willing to pray. Make a list of those things. I think it's important that we're conscious of that, because that keeps us out of the negative thinking and being focused on all the negative stuff in our life. And then think of ways that you and I can reciprocate that to other people. Reciprocate that back to those friends. Ways that we can be an encouragement to them. In fact, here at New Life, we're in the middle of 14 days of kindness. And we're challenging all of our people, our church family. We're challenging all of us to every day find a way to show an act of kindness, to be an encouragement to someone, to speak life into someone, to share Christ with someone. All right? So listen, it's time for some joy. It's time for us to have joy in our life and quit being consumed by the negative. We'll talk more about this next week, all right? I'll see you next time.